Chapter 4 Stuff and More Stuff. April 10th, 1912 was the big day. The Titanic was set to depart from Southampton, England. But before any passengers could board, the cargo needed to be loaded. Cargo included luggage and personal items belonging to passengers. One first-class family, the Ryersons, had 16 large trunks. A fancy red French car belonged to William Carter, who was returning home to Philadelphia with his family and servants. One of the most expensive items was a rare book of 11th century poems called the Rubaiyat. Its cover was studded with over 1,000 jewels, rubies, amethysts, and emeralds. The book had just been sold at an auction and was on its way to its new owner in New York. The Titanic also carried commercial cargo, items that businesses sell. In 1912, the fastest way for companies in the United States to get goods from Europe was by passenger ship. Titanic had plenty of space to transport commercial goods, storing them in the lower decks. White Star Line could charge these companies a lot of money. Commercial cargo included things like fabrics, food, cosmetic products, and 76 cases of a red dye called dragon's blood. Once the Titanic began its journey across the Atlantic, no food could be brought to it. Everything needed to feed approximately 2,200 people, a crew of 900 plus 1,300 passengers, already had to be on board. 75,000 pounds of fresh meat, 40,000 eggs, 10,000 pounds of sugar, and 16,000 lemons were only a small portion of the total food stored in the Titanic. The full name of the ship was RMS Titanic. The RMS stood for Royal Mail Ship. Titanic was to carry mail and parcels across the Atlantic for Great Britain's postal service. There were nearly 3,500 sacks containing 7 million pieces of mail. Once the cargo was loaded, the crew came on board. The head of the ship was Captain Smith. All the crew obeyed his orders. This was to be Smith's last voyage. After 38 years working for the White Star Line, Captain Smith was ready to retire. The chief responsibility for Smith and his 7 officers was to keep the ship on course, issuing orders to the engine room. The engineering crew had a dirty job in the noisy bottom of the ship. 25 engineers and 176 stokers worked around the clock to keep the boiler full of coal and the engines running. Smith and his officers also supervised the deck crew. The deck crew was in charge of the day-to-day running of the ship. There were carpenters, lookouts, store clerks, window cleaners, and quartermasters. A quartermaster's job is to look after supplies. The deck crew also included 29 seamen who were trained to operate the 20 lifeboats. Of course, no one imagined they'd need to be used. And then there was the victualling crew. This crew was over 300 people who took care of the passengers. They included waiters, maids, and attendants. They served food, made beds, and saw to the passengers' every needs. The kitchen crew was so big that there were cooks who only made fish dishes, others who only prepared vegetables. There were even cooks who just prepared sauces or soups. Last aboard were the passengers. Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect, was the very first. He wanted to make sure the voyage went smoothly. J. Bruce Ismay was among the first passengers to board. He had a fancy parlor suite with a private deck. Over 1,300 passengers walked up the gangways. Musicians, high on the upper decks, played in celebration. Soon, the passengers on board were waving to the crowd, cheering from the dock. The Titanic blew its whistle and it was off to sea. From Southampton, England, the Titanic proceeded to Cherbourg, France, 4 hours away. About 300 more passengers came on board while several got off. Then the Titanic traveled overnight to Queenstown, Ireland. Over 100 new passengers and more mail boarded the Titanic. Around 1:40 p.m. on April 11th, the ship finally set out for New York. The Titanic's whistle gave 3 long and deep blasts. A small boat replied with a short honk, and the Titanic let out one final blast. It was the last time the Titanic would see land.